I met Carter in middle school, and everyone always said we had the perfect love story. We were those annoying high school sweethearts that everyone either envied or rolled their eyes at. The couple that actually made it work when all the other teenage relationships crashed and burned. We got married right after college, had 3 beautiful kids, and from the outside, everything looked absolutely perfect. Carter was the devoted husband, I was the loving wife, and we had this whole suburban dream life that people write movies about. But here's what nobody talks about in those movies. What happens after the credits roll? What happens when you're stuck at home with 3 kids under 10? When your husband works constantly and treats you like a live-in nanny instead of the woman he supposedly fell in love with? What happens when you look in the mirror and realize you've completely lost yourself in this life that everyone keeps telling you is so perfect? By the time our kids were school-aged, I was drowning. Carter would leave early for work and come home expecting dinner on the table, homework supervised, and me to be grateful for the privilege of managing our entire household while he got to have an actual career and adult conversations. I tried going back to school, thinking maybe if I finished my degree I could find some purpose beyond being Carter's wife and the kids' mom. I was so close too, just 1 semester left. But between managing everything at home and Carter's complete inability to pick up any slack, I had to drop out. 1 semester. I was 1 semester away from having something that was mine. That's when I decided to get a job as a waitress at this local restaurant. Carter wasn't thrilled about it, but I didn't care. I needed something, anything, that would get me out of that house and around actual adults who saw me as more than just a mom. The money wasn't great, but for the first time in years, I felt like I existed as an individual person. That's where I met Bennett. He was 24, worked as a line cook, and honestly, he was everything Carter wasn't. Where Carter had gotten comfortable and stopped trying, Bennett was energetic and funny and actually paid attention when I talked. He'd make jokes during my shifts, compliment my hair when I tried something new, remember little things I mentioned about my day. It was harmless flirtation, the kind of attention that reminded me I was still an attractive woman and not just a household appliance. Of course, Carter had to make it weird. I'd come home and tell him funny stories about work, including the sweet things Bennett would say. And instead of being happy that I was finally enjoying myself, Carter got all paranoid and possessive. He started with these passive-aggressive comments about how I shouldn't encourage Bennett, how it wasn't appropriate for a married woman to be so friendly with younger men. Like I was some helpless idiot who couldn't handle a little workplace banter without throwing away my marriage. I told Carter that Bennett had backed off, that I'd made it clear I was married and not interested, just to get him to stop being so controlling about it. But honestly, why should I have to shut down the one source of happiness in my day just because my husband was feeling insecure? Bennett made me laugh. He made me feel attractive and interesting and alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. Carter had every opportunity to make me feel that way, and he chose not to. So why was it my responsibility to protect his feelings? Things at home kept getting worse. Carter started adjusting his work schedule and taking on more household tasks, but it felt patronizing, like he was trying to manage me instead of actually connecting with me. We barely spent any real time together, and when we did, all he wanted to talk about was the kids' schedules or house maintenance or other boring logistics. Meanwhile, at work, Bennett would ask about my dreams, my thoughts, what I wanted out of life beyond just being someone's wife and mother. The shift from friendship to something more happened gradually. Then, all at once, Bennett started staying after his shifts to talk with me while I closed up. We'd sit in the empty restaurant and just talk for hours about everything. My abandoned degree, his plans for the future, how we both felt stuck in lives that didn't fit us anymore. He listened to me in a way Carter hadn't in years, really listened, not just waiting for his turn to talk or trying to fix everything. When Bennett first kissed me, it felt like waking up after years of sleepwalking. I know how that sounds. I know everyone's gonna say it's just the excitement of something new and forbidden, but it wasn't just that. It was feeling seen and wanted and appreciated for who I actually was, not just what I could do for someone else's life. I'm not proud of lying to Carter, but what choice did I have? If I'd tried to talk to him about how unhappy I was, he would have just suggested more date nights or couples therapy or some other band-aid solution that didn't address the real problem. The real problem was that we'd grown into completely different people who wanted completely different things. But everyone expected us to keep pretending we were still those happy teenagers who fell in love 15 years ago. So yes, I started seeing Bennett outside of work. And yes, I lied about where I was going. But I was careful about it, and I wasn't hurting anyone as long as Carter didn't know. I was actually a better wife and mother during those months because I was finally happy. The kids got a mom who wasn't constantly frustrated and resentful. Carter got a wife who wasn't picking fights about everything. And I got to remember who I was as an individual person. The lying got easier over time. I'd tell Carter I was going to Maya's house or out with friends from work, and he never questioned it because why would he? I'd been the perfect, predictable wife for so long that the idea of me having a secret life probably never crossed his mind. Maya covered for me sometimes, though I didn't tell her the whole truth. I just said I needed some space to figure things out. And as my best friend, she understood that marriage could be suffocating sometimes. Bennett and I would meet at his apartment, or sometimes we'd drive to the next town over where no one would recognize us. We'd talk and laugh and just enjoy each other's company, without all the baggage and responsibilities that weighed down every interaction I had at home. With Bennett, I could be spontaneous and fun and sexual in a way I'd forgotten was possible. He made me feel young again. Not in a desperate trying to recapture youth way, but in a genuinely joyful way. I knew it couldn't last forever. I wasn't delusional enough to think I could maintain two separate lives indefinitely. But I also wasn't ready to give up the first real happiness I'd felt in years, just because the timing was complicated. I thought maybe eventually Carter and I would naturally grow apart enough that ending our marriage would feel like a mutual decision rather than a betrayal. Or maybe I'd figure out a way to bring some of what I'd found with Bennett back into my marriage with Carter. But then came that night in March that changed everything. Bennett and I had been talking about taking a weekend trip together, just the two of us, somewhere we could be a normal couple without all the secrecy and sneaking around. We couldn't actually do it because I couldn't explain a whole weekend away to Carter. But we spent the evening at Bennett's apartment planning this imaginary getaway and drinking wine and just pretending for a few hours that we were free to be together. I should have gone home. I knew I should have gone home. But Bennett asked me to stay, said he wanted to wake up next to me just once, and I was just tired of always being responsible and practical and putting everyone else's needs first. So I stayed. I turned off my phone, curled up next to Bennett, and for one night I chose what I wanted, instead of what everyone expected from me. I woke up around 5 in the morning with this sick feeling in my stomach, knowing I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. I'd never stayed out all night before. I'd never been completely unreachable. Carter was going to know something was wrong, and I had no idea how to explain it. I got dressed as quietly as possible, kissed Bennett goodbye, and drove home, trying to come up with a story that would make sense. Carter was sitting in the living room when I walked in, still in his pajamas, looking like he hadn't slept at all. The way he looked at me, not angry, just hurt and confused, made my stomach drop. "Where have you been?" he asked, and his voice was so quiet and broken that I almost told him the truth right then. Instead, I said I'd been at Maya's house, that we'd had too much wine and I'd crashed on her couch. It wasn't a great lie, but it was believable enough. Except then, Carter pulled out his phone and showed me this tracking app I'd forgotten we'd set up years ago for safety reasons. My little dot had been sitting at Bennett's apartment complex all night. "Are you having an affair with Bennett?" Carter asked, and the way he said it, not accusatory, just resigned, told me he already knew the answer. I tried to change my story, said I'd actually been at Alice's house and maybe the GPS was wrong, but we both knew it was over. Carter just kept looking at me with these devastated eyes, waiting for me to stop lying, and finally I just nodded. What else could I do? I expected him to yell or throw things or demand details, but Carter just sat there processing it. Then he asked how long it had been going on, and when I said 6 months, he actually flinched like I'd hit him. 6 months of marriage counseling, he said. 6 months of him trying to figure out what he'd done wrong, why I seemed so distant unhappy. 6 months of him bending over backward to be a better husband while I was sneaking around behind his back. The next few weeks were horrible. Carter wanted to try couples therapy, wanted to fight for our marriage, and I felt obligated to go along with it, even though part of me had already checked out. The therapist kept asking what I wanted, what would make me happy, and the honest answer was that I didn't know anymore. I loved Bennett, or thought I did, but I also had history with Carter and 3 kids and a whole life we'd built together. I told Carter I needed time to think about whether I wanted to be with him or Bennett. And looking back, I can see how cruel that must have sounded. But I was trying to be honest for once, instead of just telling him what he wanted to hear. I genuinely didn't know what the right choice was, and everyone kept pressuring me to make a decision before I was ready. The therapy sessions were awkward and painful, with Carter trying so hard to say all the right things and me feeling guilty for not being more grateful for his efforts. He kept asking what he could do differently, how he could be a better husband, and I wanted to tell him that it wasn't about him being better or worse. It was about us being wrong for each other, in ways that couldn't be fixed with date nights and better communication. Meanwhile, I was still seeing Bennett, though I was more careful about it. I'd park my car at the grocery store or the gym and walk to meet him, or we'd meet during my lunch breaks when I was supposed to be running errands. I know how that sounds, going to therapy with my husband while continuing to see my affair partner, but I wasn't ready to give up either relationship until I knew for sure what I wanted. Carter kept asking if I'd broken things off with Bennett, and eventually I decided to stage a breakup scene to buy myself more time to figure things out. I met Bennett at a coffee shop and had this dramatic conversation where I told him we couldn't see each other anymore, that I needed to try to save my marriage. Bennett played along, though we both knew it was temporary. Then I went home and told Carter I'd ended things with Bennett, and I even cried a little because the whole situation was genuinely upsetting. Carter held me and told me how proud he was that I'd made the right choice, and I let him comfort me even though I was basically lying to his face. It felt manipulative, even as I was doing it, but I also needed the comfort and didn't know where else to get it. Of course, I didn't actually stop seeing Bennett. If anything, the secrecy made it more intense. We'd meet at different places, always changing our routine, feeling like we were getting away with something. Bennett said he understood why I couldn't leave Carter right away, that he was willing to wait for me to figure things out. That patience and understanding just made me care about him more. But apparently, we weren't as careful as we thought. About a week after my fake breakup with Bennett, Maya and some of my coworkers staged this intervention where they confronted me about still seeing him. They said people had noticed us together, that I was being reckless and stupid, that I was going to lose everything for some kid who wasn't worth it. I was furious. These people who barely knew Bennett, who had no idea what my marriage was actually like, were judging me and acting like they had any right to tell me how to live my life. Maya especially hurt me because she was supposed to be my best friend, supposed to support me no matter what. But instead, she was acting like Carter's advocate instead of mine. What I didn't know was that someone from work had texted Carter during the intervention, told him I was still seeing Bennett despite what I'd said about ending it. So when I got home that night, feeling defensive and angry about being ganged up on, Carter was waiting for me with this look of complete disgust. He didn't even let me try to explain. He just woke me up the next morning and said we were getting divorced, that he was done being lied to and manipulated, that he'd already talked to a lawyer. The finality of it shocked me. I thought we'd have another big fight, another round of therapy, another chance to figure things out. But Carter was just done. I moved out within a week. Bennett helped me find a small apartment across town, and for the first time we could be together openly without all the sneaking around and lies. It should have been romantic and exciting, but instead, it felt scary and uncertain. I'd never lived alone before. I'd gone straight from my parents' house to college dorms to living with Carter. Bennett was sweet about the whole thing, very supportive and understanding about how hard the transition was. When I found out I was pregnant a few weeks after moving out, he stepped up immediately and said he wanted to be a real family with me. It felt like proof that we were meant to be together, that all the pain and chaos had been worth it. But reality started setting in pretty quickly. I had to quit my job at the restaurant because, as Bennett's supervisor, our relationship was creating a hostile work environment situation that was about to get me fired anyway. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd left my marriage for this man, and now being with him was costing me my financial independence. Bennett got fired a few weeks later for showing up to work high, which I honestly should have seen coming. He'd always been a little too fond of weed and drinking, but I'd thought it was just young guy stuff that he'd grow out of. Turns out it was more serious than that, and without the structure of work, it got worse quickly. I bought him a car, thinking it would help him find another job and show him I was committed to building a life together. It cleaned out most of my savings, but I thought of it as an investment in our future. Bennett was grateful and promised he'd use it to get back on his feet, but mostly he just used it to drive around with his friends and buy drugs. The worst part was finding out that Carter was dating Maya. My Maya. My best friend who had listened to me complain about my marriage for years, who had covered for me when I needed alibis, who had acted so concerned about my poor choices. Apparently, she'd been comforting Carter through our divorce, and that comfort had turned into something more. Everyone acted like this was perfectly natural and healthy. Carter, moving on, and finding happiness with someone who appreciated him. But what about everything Maya knew about our marriage? What about girl code? What about the fact that she was supposed to be my friend first? Instead, she'd swooped in to play replacement wife before the divorce was even final. Carter lost weight, started training for triathlons, got a whole new wardrobe. He looked better than he had in years, and everyone kept commenting on how good the single life looked on him. Meanwhile, I was pregnant and broke and dealing with Bennett's increasingly obvious drug problem, but somehow Carter was the one getting all the sympathy and support. The kids barely wanted to see me. Carter had done this masterful job of being the stable, responsible parent while painting me as the selfish one who'd abandoned the family for a fling. He never said anything directly, but he didn't have to. The kids could see which parent had kept their life together and which one was struggling. Bennett and I are still together, technically. We have a beautiful baby who deserves better than the chaos we've created. Bennett talks about getting clean and finding a real job, and sometimes he'll go a few weeks without using, and I'll think maybe we can make this work. But then something stressful happens, and he disappears for a day or two, comes back high and full of apologies, and I remember why everyone tried to warn me about him. I know how this all sounds. I know everyone thinks I'm the villain in this story, the selfish wife who threw away a good marriage for some young guy who wasn't worth it. But they don't understand how suffocating my life with Carter had become, how invisible I felt, how desperate I was for someone to see me as more than just a wife and mother. Maybe I made mistakes. Maybe I handled things badly. But I was drowning in that marriage, and Bennett felt like the only thing keeping me afloat. Was I supposed to just accept being miserable for the rest of my life because it was the responsible thing to do? Was I supposed to pretend I didn't have feelings and desires of my own? Carter seems happy now with Maya, and honestly, they probably deserve each other. Two judgmental people who think they're better than everyone else, building their perfect little life on the ruins of my friendship and my marriage. The kids are adjusting to their new normal, and Carter's probably telling them some sanitized version of why mommy doesn't live with them anymore. I'm trying to build something new with Bennett and our baby. It's not the life I planned, and it's definitely not easy. But at least it's honest. At least I'm not pretending to be someone I'm not just to make other people comfortable. Maybe that makes me selfish, but I'd rather be honestly selfish than dishonestly selfless. Everyone keeps waiting for me to admit I was wrong, to apologize for blowing up my life and hurting people. But I'm not sorry for choosing myself for once. I'm not sorry for refusing to stay in a marriage that was slowly killing my spirit. I'm sorry people got hurt, and I'm sorry the whole thing got so messy. But I'm not sorry for wanting more than what I had. Maybe Bennett and I won't make it long term. Maybe I'll end up a single mom struggling to co-parent with an addict, while my ex-husband lives happily ever after with my former best friend. But at least I'll know I tried to find something real instead of just settling for something safe. At least I'll know I didn't spend my whole life wondering what if.